Hello everyone, and welcome again to the International Online Crime Festival hosted by the one and only crime fiction culture magazine in Turkey, 221B. Today we have Mr. Barry Forshaw as our guest. Mr. Forshaw is one of the UK's leading experts on crime fiction and film. He is the writer of the Crime Fiction A Reader's Guide, besides many more important titles. He reviews crime fiction for various newspapers, like The Times, The Telegraph, and The Guardian, and also kindly contributes to our magazine 221B2. Today, Mr. Forshaw will provide a concise history of the entire crime genre from the very beginnings up to the present. What a delight. Hello, Mr. Forshaw, and welcome.
Thank you very much.
We are so glad to have you here. We are excited to hear you talk, and so are our viewers. Therefore, I will leave you to it. We will meet again at the end to have a short conversation. Barry Forshaw, everyone.
Thank you very much, Fulya. Well, I've written a lot of books about crime fiction, probably too many over the years. And I decided with the last book, which was this one, it was going to be the book that put it all together in one volume, the entire history of the genre. I've written about Nordic noir, I'd written about American noir, British crime fiction, American, and so forth. But I decided that it was worth going right from the beginning. Where does the crime fiction genre start? Well, you could argue that it starts with the Greeks, Greek tragedy. You could say that the first murder story is probably Oedipus Rex, where a man tries to find out who murdered his father, and the solution is he did. The Greeks knew all about crime and punishment, and they knew about bloodshed, which is an essential element of crime fiction. Obviously, then we have Shakespeare as a man who knew about crime as well and knew about how to hold an audience enthralled. The most common feeling about his plays is Macbeth is the closest to crime fiction, in the sense it shows what the American writer Robert Warshaw called the gangster as tragic hero. In other words, the gangster has to start somebody low down on the totem pole. He has to attain power, usually by murdering a lot of people. And then there has to be that final fall from grace and death. Well, that's all in Macbeth, isn't it? Here in Britain, we have the most famous serial killer of all time, Jack the Ripper. The reason that he has such a currency and such an interest abroad is because we don't know who he is, and we never will. There are lots of theories, and he'll never be caught. Lately, there's been an attempt to rehabilitate, or at least talk about, his victims. The assumption was that they were prostitutes, and they apparently were not all prostitutes. But he gave crime fiction, whether you approve of it or not, the notion of the serial killer. And there are many, many iterations of Jack the Ripper going through the whole genre, right up to someone, for instance, like Hannibal Lecter, who is kind of a grotesque monster in the way that Jack clearly was. But it was an American who really created the modern detective story as we know it, and that is, of course, the great Edgar Allan Poe. Now, I'm in Islington, London, and something like 10 minutes walk in that direction is Stoke Newington, which is where Edgar Allan Poe was a schoolboy. Yes, the creator of the detective story and the horror story, and one of the great writers of the genre, both genres, lived in London as a boy. He was an unhappy schoolboy here. Poe, of course, created the notion of the deductive detective, if you like, the ratiocination. That begins with, there we are, a nice picture of Edgar Allan Poe, just flashed on the screen. The detective who is intellectual, not very physical, not a physical character at all, and a man who has an assistant, the narrator of the stories. His name is Auguste Dupin, Chevalier Auguste Dupin. The narrator is not as bright as he is, so he has to have things explained to him. All of this may sound very familiar because, of course, Arthur Conan Doyle took these notions from Poe and created the greatest of all fictional detectives, which is, of course, Sherlock Holmes, and expanded greatly and introduced a lot more elements. But the basic elements are all to be found in Edgar Allan Poe. And he created a lot of tropes of the crime fiction genre. For instance, the locked room mystery is in Murders in the Rue Morgue. the clue, the notion of the clue which is visible in plain sight, the narrator being a psychopath, which was became extremely popular. That's in The Telltale Heart, the story told by a murderer in the first person. There is no overestimating the importance of Poe as a creator of the detective story. But in this country, in Britain, we had some pretty damned important writers who contributed to the genre before it became a genre that was actually described as crime fiction. Of course, one of them is Charles Dickens, and his novels utilize crime fiction tropes. He also creates the first important literary detective in Inspector Bucket in Bleak House. It's not essential to the novel, but nevertheless, it's in there. And Dickens, being a showman, knew perfectly well that audiences were fascinated by murder and detection. Those elements appear again and again. And of course, as a performer, his most famous showpiece was The Murder of Nancy from Oliver Twist, which had his audience gasping. The appeal of Dickens talking to his audience about this murder, which is brilliantly described, is a progenitor of the crime fiction genre. He had a friend, and there he is, Charles Dickens, and his friend, who knows whether or not a picture of him will appear, who was Wilkie Collins. Wilkie Collins was a friend of Dickens, and he employed him. Dickens employed Collins, and in 2 books, these were definitely crime stories and certainly early progenitors of the crime novel. He created very important crime fiction. There is The Moonstone, of course, which reads perhaps less well these days than it once did, but it's still a remarkable novel of detection and mystery and murder. But the one which is most influential is The Woman in White, which is just a wonderful piece of writing. It functions both as a novel of character, as a literary novel, and as a novel of mystery and obfuscation. He also creates, very importantly, the first really serious, the first memorable, the first great villain of crime fiction in Count Fosco, the Italian count. To the British, the fact that he's Italian automatically tells you something about him. There's kind of a mistrust back then, I'm sure there isn't today, of the foreign. And Count Fosco is full of fairly disgusting physical habits. He's corpulent. He's been played by many overweight actors over the years, such as Sidney Greenstreet. And he has a particularly disgusting habit, which Wilkie Collins lets us know about. He secretes about his body mice, pet mice. And when people are talking about him, these mice are moving about the body from one pocket to the next. It's a wonderful way of making you feel what a repulsive man he is. He's also super intelligent, and he creates the plot, which I will not reveal to you. I'm sure most people have read it, but if you haven't, it's a wonderfully complex, important plot. We mustn't forget as well, when we're still talking about the early days of the genre, Fyodor Dostoevsky in Russia in Crime and Punishment. Crime and Punishment, of course, is a very important novel. It's a literary novel. It's also a crime novel. And it also produces something which you will know, an idea which appears most often in the American TV series Columbo, which is the very tenacious, very insistent, patient detective who bit by bit wears down the killer. There's no real suspense. At the beginning of the novel, fairly early on, the detective knows who the killer is. The killer knows that the detective knows. It sounds like Columbo, doesn't it? But this is already done with Porphyry and Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, which also features a very gruesome axe murder. In America at the moment, we have to have trigger warnings about books that will disturb you, just in case anybody reads a crime novel and is disturbed, God forbid. Well, Crime and Punishment needs a warning because it has some gruesome murders. We also have to go, when talking about the early progenitors of the novel, there we are on the screen, Dostoevsky. I'm very impressed by the visuals for this talk. We go to France, Émile Zola, who was an important writer of novels which utilized a crime fiction. I'm going to mention just one here, and it may appear later in the talk when I get to American hardboiled writers, and that's Thérèse Raquin. Thérèse Raquin is about a young couple who sexually obsessed with each other, can't keep their hands off each other, but there is an unfortunate husband in the way. The husband really has to go. He has to be killed. And if this sounds familiar, it is indeed the plot of James M. Cain's The Postman Always Rings Twice, which is a modern American version. But Zola did it first. What Zola also did first was to write about sex in a way which is extremely effective. The first sexual encounter in Thérèse Rackham. I advise you to read it. In Britain, we have the Bad Sex Award for bad writing about sex. Zola would never have won it, because this is good writing about sex. Now we move on to the Golden Age in Britain. The Golden Age in Britain is still loved around the world. It's loved in Turkey, it's loved in America, you name it. And in fact, the image that a lot of people have of Britain is the one through the novels of Agatha Christie and writers of her ilk. In fact, a lot of the great Golden Age writers in Britain were women. It was a female-led thing. We had Dorothy Sayers also, a woman who was actually probably a better writer than Christie. At the moment, we have a current series of new films being made with Kenneth Branagh playing Hercule Poirot, her detective, as a fairly grotesque figure. It's a shame, really, that even the great David Suchet, who filmed virtually every novel for TV, plays Poirot as a caricatured figure. And he's always played as a caricatured figure. It's very rare to see him portrayed in a more realistic light. Christie was aware that she had created a grotesque figure. She wrote him as a kind of imitation of Sherlock Holmes. She was openly admitting that Poirot was her version of Sherlock Holmes. So she gave him a series of characteristics, such as the bald head that shines and so forth, the fussy manner, there she is, the dame, and she regretted that she'd given him so many characteristics that she was then stuck with for the rest of her career and his career. Modern writers I interviewed, such as P.D. James and Ruth Rendell, were very careful to make sure that they didn't set themselves that trap of making their character have to behave in certain ways. Murder on the Orient Express, as I say, is the one that most people know. There are male writers like Francis Isles who wrote in the Golden Age, but it is pretty well female-led. If you have to read one Golden Age novel, it's probably by, well, you need to read Christie, of course, and Christie is easy to read. A lot of people read Christie when they're learning English because they've found via computer that she has a fairly limited vocabulary, and this vocabulary is limited and makes it easier for people for whom English is not a first language to encounter. So she's very useful if you're learning to read English. A better writer, but not as popular, is Dorothy L. Sayers. Her detective, Lord Peter Wimsey, is, of course, famous as an aristocratic toff, snob, if you like. And when he began, he was basically a silly ass figure, a figure of fun. Throughout the series of novels that she wrote about him, Sayers deepened and developed him until he became a character. Like, I'm afraid, Poirot, whenever he's played on film or TV, he's usually played as a caricature, which is a great shame because there is more to him than that. The novel, if you're only going to read one Dorothy Sayers novel that you should read, is Gaudy Night. This is the novel in which he proposes to Harriet Vane, who has appeared in earlier novels by her. In fact, he gets her off on a charge of murder. And there's actually, it's unusual in the sense that there is no murder in it. There are crimes, but no murder. That's not a spoiler, don't worry. And it's beautifully written, it's beautifully developed, and it's set in a woman's college. That's the Sayers novel that you should read. My third chapter in Crime Fiction: A Reader's Guide goes to the States. And this is very dear to my heart. The hard-boiled pulp writers. Much as I love the British writers, my heart really is with the Americans. And like a lot of people, the first writer I read of hard-boiled American crime fiction was Raymond Chandler. But before we get to Raymond Chandler, we need to talk about Dashiell Hammett. Now, Dashiell Hammett's a fascinating figure. He is extremely important, left-wing writer, a real writer, a writer whose novels are in the sense of being literary. The language is pared down and existential, very much like Hemingway. In fact, like Hemingway, there are no frills. We get what's essentially on the page. And with Sam Spade, he creates the first important hard-boiled detective, and a lot of the cliches appear very early on. The blonde, the seductive femme fatale, the detective in his office with his filing cabinet, with whiskey in the filing cabinet, and a series of complicated murders and mysteries that all come together. Dashiell Hammett cannot be overestimated because he had a long relationship with Lillian Hellman, another political writer, and his books are political in the sense that other hard-boiled writers aren't. Red Harvest is possibly the one you need to read if you're just going to read one, because when you read Red Harvest, if you haven't read it, the plot will be very familiar. It was used in Yojimbo by Kurosawa. It was used in Last Man Standing with Bruce Willis. And of course, Clint Eastwood and Sergio Leone used it in A Fistful of Dollars. It's the idea of the rogue agent, the maverick, who comes into a corrupt town and basically plays off two corrupt groups against each other to his own advantage. But great though Hammett was, the man who does it for me, and I think the man who wrote the greatest single novel of the American hard-boiled tradition, is Raymond Chandler. And The Big Sleep is still the best. A lot of people like The Long Goodbye, and The Long Goodbye is wonderful. The Little Sister is wonderful. Virtually anyone, except possibly the last couple of novels where there's a falling off. But The Big Sleep is rather as with Fleming's Casino Royale. The first novel is where he sets out his stall. And the use of language is nonpareil. There is nobody like Marlowe. There he is, Raymond Chandler. He was, in fact, it's interesting that you can't get a more American writer than Raymond Chandler, but when he went back to States after being educated in Britain, people thought he was English. He was educated at Dulwich College in England. It seems amazing to us when we hear him on the radio that Americans ever thought he was British, because his voice sounds utterly American to us, but there you go. Marlowe is an unreal figure. As Chandler knew, he knew that if he was the kind of irritant to gangsters and to people he proves to be guilty of murders, he would be dead. He's a knight errant. He's also very chaste. It's interesting that when we think of womanizing, sexually promiscuous private eyes, we think of Marlowe, but no, he isn't. He's quite chaste. And it's other private eyes who came later, such as Mike Hammer, created by Mickey Spillane, who bring a lot more sex into the equation. I'm going to mention a man a lot of people don't know about. It amazes me that every crime writer you meet worth their salt will know this man's name. A lot of readers still don't. Ross MacDonald. Ross MacDonald's series of books featuring his private eye, Lou Archer, are different from Hammett and different from Chandler. They're more psychologically based. Lou Archer often behaves more like a psychologist when dealing with his clients than a private eye. There's less violence. There's a big investigation of the family. There's a nice picture of him wearing a hat to conceal his baldness. The family is the source of quite often a kind of poison in relationships. It's usually the source, and often the father. That is a bit of a spoiler. You'll often find that missing fathers in Ross MacDonald novels are the source of everything that goes wrong. He has been filmed. There are two Paul Newman films, for instance, of The Moving Target and The Drowning Pool. Paul Newman felt obliged to change the name from Lou Archer to Lou Harper because I think it was for astrological reasons, or I think he'd felt that films of his that began with an H did rather well, so he asked for the name to be changed. They're not bad. The Moving Target is particularly good. The Galton Case is the one you should read, but I warn you, once you read Ross MacDonald, you will be hooked, and there are a lot of them. There are a lot of them to read. I should quickly mention here James Hadley Chase, hard-boiled writer, still influential in a lot of people. The two novels by him, which there's The Drowning Pool, and it is in fact the Paul Newman cover, which maybe the film isn't very good. Read the novel. James Hadley Chase, we'll pass over quickly, but he is a good writer. Very basic, and Double Indemnity and The Postman Always Rings Twice, his two most famous books, have been often filmed and often ripped off. In fact, we do have a hard-boiled writer in Britain who was a bit of a phony, James Hadley Chase, who wrote the famous No Orchids for Miss Blandish. This was a book that my mother read as a girl, and I remember that she was, I think, not beaten, but she was punished by her mother for reading this appalling pornography. This was considered such a pornographic book in its day, it wouldn't really raise an eyebrow today, that even George Orwell wrote a famous essay about it, condemning it, called Raffles and Miss Blandish. He wrote about it and objected to the fact that Slim, the psychopathic villain of the novel, had an orgasm when he was knifing people to death, and various other fairly graphic things. When you read No Orchids from Miss Blandish today, and you should, you won't find this, because James Hadley Chase was shocked by this Orwell attack and issued a kind of sanitized, censored version of the novel, which is the one most of us know today. He's an Englishman who had not been to America when he wrote the novel, and it looks and reads a little phony today, but it's still got great energy. We talked there about private eyes, and of course we have to move to the modern age now, and here we move to the great American writer, possibly the best living writer of American crime fiction today, although there are a few contenders, James Lee Burke. His Dave Robichaud books are wonderful. They are epic. They're sprawling. They give a picture of America, which is very complete. They're energized by anger. James Lee Burke was angry at George Bush. He's certainly angry at Donald Trump. He regards that's the backdrop of most of his novels. He's not interested so much in local corruption, although that figures, as in the fact that there's a worm in the bud of American society. And there he is, James Lee Burke. I was once told when I was vice chair of the Crime Writers Association in England that I should invite him over to possibly receive an award, but he doesn't travel. He doesn't come to Britain. His daughter does, Alepha Burke, who's a very good writer in her own right, but I don't think we're going to see James Lee Burke in any country other than America. There are very good writers, women writers of crime fiction. Of course, we've discussed some British ones. In America, we have the great Sarah Paretsky, whose Private Eye is V.I. Warshawski, which has been filmed with Kathleen Turner. She is another woman who is greatly exercised by the politics of the United States, and that gets strongly into the novels. I don't think you read either James Lee Burke or Sarah Paretsky if you want to avoid political commentary, because that's threaded through the books. Warshawski is a wonderful character. They are feminist novels. She has to encounter sexism, but both Paretsky and Warshawski are not anti-male. A lot of feminist writing has to have the bad guy, which will be obviously male. It's not quite that simple. It's not quite that binary in Sarah Paretsky's books. We also have, as well as the Private Eyes, and this is in my 5th chapter, the cops. I met Ed McBain, or Salvatore Lambino, or Evan Hunter, whichever one of the 3 names you want to give him. Sal Lambino is his real name, several times. Interesting writer. Obviously, he created the notion of the ensemble of cops in the 87th Precinct novels, much copied since. It's still being used today in French shows such as Spiral, Engrenage, which show a team of cops working together, sometimes disagreeing, sometimes agreeing, and not necessarily focusing on just one cop. He basically created that. He also created something that he was very annoyed by the fact that other people made a lot of the money out of it, but he created it, which is the forensic crime novel. This was just one strand in his books. And when he realized that other writers like Patricia Cornwell were using the forensic element front and center, if you like, he thought, why didn't I do that? But I think his legacy is secure. Speaking of Mavericks, which we haven't quite left behind, in Britain we have the creator of one of the most popular Mavericks in modern crime fiction, that's Lee Child, who of course lives in mostly America, and prides himself on the fact that this very British writer's novels have a faultless picture of America. He can't be caught out. There aren't things that let him down. And he's very proud of that fact. To my knowledge, he's not yet been caught out. He's just actually given up the Jack Reacher books, the tough ex-military policeman, and he's handed the franchise over to his brother, Andrew. So the first one is quite good, but Lee Child apparently had quite a lot to do with that. So one wonders, there he is with Tom Cruise. Just interject a personal note here. When I met Lee and Tom Cruise had just been cast as Jack Reacher, I said to him, how tall is Jack Reacher again? He knew exactly where I was going. His publisher looked rather nervously at me. He said, yes, he's over 6 foot. And then Lee looked at me in that steely look of his and said, do you think Tom Cruise is a good actor? I said, yes, of course he is. He was very good in Rain Man. He said, well, a lot of people will go to see a Tom Cruise film, which is a film of one of my books. If they don't like it, they'll still read the books. If they do like it, they may buy the books that they wouldn't have bought before. It was a win-win situation for him. But now, of course, there is a TV series with somebody else other than Tom Cruise playing Jack Reacher. There are other good police detectives in this country. There's Anne Cleves, who's created Jimmy Perez in her Shetland series. She shows with me, we talk about this quite a lot, an interest in Nordic crime fiction, which is another chapter in the book. And that Nordic feel of bleak landscapes and cold climate is in her Shetland books. She also writes about a baggy, disheveled female detective called Vera, who is played on TV by Brenda Blethyn. America has Jeffrey Deaver, who has dabbled in so many genres. It's hard to keep track, but his Lincoln Rhyme series is very important. In Britain, also, another important detective who I talk about is Colin Dexter with his Inspector Morse. The Inspector Morse TV series is, again, many foreigners' vision of Britain. They think that Britain is either like the small village we see in the Miss Marple books of Agatha Christie, where everybody knows everybody else's business, or it's all like a university town like Oxford or Cambridge. And yes, he does show Oxford very well and very evocatively, but there's more to it than that. I suppose while I'm still on those detectives, I need to mention LA Confidential and James Ellroy. James Ellroy is a tricky character to interview, as I've found on occasion. He doesn't suffer fools gladly, and you better bloody well be well prepared when you're interviewing him. I think I got away with interviewing him and coming out without too much blood on the floor because I was of a similar age. I'd heard from his publicist that he'd been quite hard on young female journalists, and he is a contrarian. He will say things to upset people. However, you have to say that he is an epic writer in his best books, not so much the more recent ones, but books like LA Confidential, who writes in his own utterly idiomatic style, idiosyncratic style. LA Confidential is, with a very good film made of it, is the one to start with him. There's also such great writers in America as Dennis Lehane. Mystic River is the one to go to. Robert Crace. We've got other Americans who work abroad, like Donna Leon, who sets her Brunetti books in Venice, where she actually lives. Oh, and in this country, or if we're going to talk about the British Isles, because it's still a united Britain for the time being, Ian Rankin and Val McDermid. So the two of the best-selling crime writers in Britain are both Scots. Ian Rankin's Rebus books are much treasured, and he sustained an extremely high level of expertise over many years, as has Val McDermid, another Scottish writer. There are also very good recent writers in Britain, such as Kate Rhodes, Sarah Hillary, Sarah Ward. We have a lot of very good writers. Crime fiction at the moment, in both Britain and America and abroad, and I write about a lot of foreign writers, is in a very good state. There is a lot of repetition, and we'll get to that in another chapter when we get to it, which maybe has to be avoided. The next chapter was called Professionals. This is lawyers, doctors, forensic specialists, and so forth. And of course, the creator of the modern legal thriller is John Grisham. And John Grisham really is the reason an awful lot of lawyers who are writing crime novels when they really shouldn't be. They should be sticking to the day job, because not many of them are as good as John Grisham or Scott Turow, who wrote a book called Presumed Innocent. And there's still a lot of lawyers making that particular directional change in their career. Patricia Cornwell's Case Scarpetta is, as I mentioned earlier, one of the forensic specialists. Kathy Reich's an extremely good American writer. And then we can't get away from the fact, when we're talking about people other than police detectives and other than private eyes, the great, late Elmore Leonard, who is the master of the novel which has criminals at the center of the novel. This had already been done superbly well by George V. Higgins with the Friends of Eddie Coyle, which had a small-time arms dealer at its center. But Elmore Leonard, with an absolutely brilliant grasp of dialogue, which is why he makes the films of his books work so well, because you can take the dialogue from the books and just put them straight on the screen, and it works really well, as we found when Quentin Tarantino filmed one of his books. Other amateurs, and this is in chapter 7, are journalists and other professions. Well, there's Elmore Leonard. I met him just before his death. He was, I think, in his 70s when I met him. What struck me was the fact that he looked so effortlessly cool and charismatic. He's wearing fairly tight jeans and a t-shirt, and not many men of his age could rock with that kind of outfit, but he certainly did. I mentioned Conan Doyle. He is the amateur detective, if you like, but I've already talked about him. G.K. Chesterton's Father Brown. I'm talking here about amateurs. So Chesterton's Father Brown, a crime-solving priest. Dick Francis, British writer, uses the world of the equestrian world, horse racing, as the basis for his books. His son, Felix, is now continuing the franchise. And a very good writer called Nicola Upson has had a very good idea, which is to take the crime writer Josephine Tay and make her the heroine of her novels. Now, there are so many bloody novels which use existing characters, real life people as detectives, and don't bring it off. She does. For instance, Giles Brandreth uses Oscar Wilde as a detective. Well, this is fine, but I found myself when I was reading them thinking, how did Oscar Wilde have time to be solving crimes when he was the toast of the London stage, or he was serving time in a prison for failed legal action? He didn't have time, but you can accept Josephine Tay had time between her books to solve crimes. Chapter 8 is dark psychology. Dark psychology is really the modern watchword, the modern emblem. I was lucky enough to meet the great and dark American writer, Patricia Highsmith. I was a very young man and I met her. I asked her how she felt about writing so many novels about a psychopath. And she looked at me dead on and said, sorry, what do you mean? And I said, well, Tom Ripley, he killed so many people. And she said to me, without a trace of a smile, but Tom Ripley only kills people who get in his way, which was fine. I think she was, again, like I said about James Ellroy, a contrarian. I personally like best her books which aren't the Ripley books. The Ripley books are very good, but she's written a whole series of other novels, most of which are being filmed at the moment. She's going through a golden renaissance, which are about ordinary men and women, or not so ordinary men and women, but in which murder or their own behavior brings them down. Highsmith has the most dyspeptic, darkest view of human nature. And do you want to know who she's particularly hard on? Her own sex, women. Women do not get an easy feminist ride with horrible men in her books. I did say to her, you seem to be slightly on the side of some of the male killers in your books, as if the killing of some of the women is justified. And she said to me, well, yeah, some women deserve to be killed. Now, I was a young journalist. I was probably being wound up. But nevertheless, we do know that she didn't really like her. And she also said to me that she didn't particularly like gay women, which from a gay woman, I thought was rather interesting. There are modern writers who deal with dark psychology. Gillian Flynn, Sharp Objects is a very good examination of the dark psychology of her anti-heroine. Chapter 9 is about serial killers, and they're really where I'm just going to cut it down to one name, and you know who I mean. It's Thomas Harris, and it's Hannibal Lecter. When those Hannibal Lecter books, such as Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs, first appeared, they were like a thunderbolt. They were like a lightning flash. They transformed the genre. For a start, they pretty well, for many years, put paid to the horror novel, because you didn't need horror novels, because Thomas Harris was writing novels far more gruesome than any horror writer. So he was having characters who were having their brains trepanned, and they were having their brains sauteed and fed to them while they were still conscious. What Stephen King would have given for that idea. the horror novel has rallied in recent years, but because of Thomas Harris using horror tropes, there's Hannibal Lecter, and probably the best actor to play him. There are people who name other actors, but I still think that we can talk about Anthony Hopkins as the best actor who portrays him. In fact, Lecter is a version of not just Moriarty, the great villain of the Sherlock Holmes books, but Sherlock Holmes. So if you remember the first encounter in the cell between the young FBI agent Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter, he does this very Holmesian, there's Thomas Harris, he does this very Holmesian analysis of her, talking about her background, her appearance, the clothes she's wearing, the bag she's carrying, and makes a series of unerring deductions about her. She's already been warned, don't let this man get in your mind. It's a shame in a way that Harris has not brought that sequence of books to an end. When we last saw Hannibal Lecter and Clarice Starling, she was kind of a brainwashed sex slave of this appalling, cannibalistic but charming monster. And I really wish Thomas Harris would write the book that brings an end to that saga. I want Hannibal Lecter to get a kind of comeuppance in a way, for instance, that Tony Soprano never did. I think going back to what I said about Robert Warshaw, the gangster's tragic hero, you do need the destruction of the great monsters, because that's a kind of satisfying thing, is it not? Nevertheless, if you haven't read the Thomas Harris books, you need to. I've mentioned Highsmith. I did manage to meet Hitchcock, and I think we need to bring him in here, even though this is a discussion of crime fiction, because he is the definitive chronicler on film of crime fiction, and films such as Strangers on the Train, which is a film of Patricia Highsmith's first novel, needs to be seen, as of course do such films as Psycho. I've mentioned Elmore Leonard. In chapter 11, I went on to organized crime, Wise Guys, Godfathers. Now, I'm sometimes asked the question, are there any films, because I write a lot about films, this book is as much about films as books, which are as good as the books that they're based on, or even better? Well, yes, The Godfather. Mario Puzo's novel is good. It's basically a fairly standard, slightly trashy potboiler. But Francis Ford Coppola's film is much richer and more developed and more nuanced than the novel. And if it's a choice between the novel and the film of The Godfather, I know which I would choose. I went on in the next chapter to Crime and Society, called it Class, Race and Politics. We live in an age now where, well, not so much class, but certainly race is a crucial issue. And so many publishers are now publishing black writers, trying to redress the balance that they felt that publishing was too white. It's even extended to publishing itself, where publishers are hiring black people in order to redress the balance. They were The Godfather, with a great moment with Brando dispensing favors to the people who come to ask him for favors. So a white writer, George Pelecanos, deals with race with great sensitivity and intelligence. A black writer, Walter Mosley, who I've met, who's an interesting figure. Walter Mosley is not what you'd expect. I can't really say on air like this in the way he's not what you expect, but he's a very surprising figure, but a very good American writer. For my money, one of the best American black writers of crime fiction at the moment is the writer Attica Locke. Pleasantville is remarkable. Her books are, again, ambitious, very large scale. They are about the black experience, but they're not aimed exclusively at black readers, and they're not about the history of slavery. I've had several black writers over the years say to me, they've been told off by other black writers because they're not dealing with the legacy of slavery and oppression. They've said to me, well, I don't want to write about that. Other people do it really well. That's not what I want to do. I want to do other things. Attica Locke writes about America. She writes about, there she is. She writes utterly multifaceted and developed characters, and each book is preferable to the one before. The next category for me is spooks and spies. I go through the early progenitors of that era, such as Joseph Conrad, who created the spy novel Sapper, John Buchan, Ian Fleming, of course. And it's quite easy with Ian Fleming to say, if I'm going to read one book, it's the first one. It's Casino Royale. That wonderful description at the beginning of a casino, the smell of a casino in the morning is as evocative as anything by literary fiction. There's the English writer Eric Ambler, who, of course, brought left-wing politics into the genre and is a very good writer indeed. Len Dayton, not so recognized these days as he used to be, but John le Carré certainly is, who's just died as I record this. Le Carré essentially turned the novel of espionage into a literary form. He did it right from the start with books such as The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, and with books like The Honourable Schoolboy, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and then more recent books such as The Constant Gardener. He enriched the form. The novels became very long. If I have one caveat with John le Carré and conversations I had with him, which are not many, but his dislike of America and Big Pharma was absolutely visceral. He hated Big Pharma with a passion and saw it as what was wrong with so much in the world today. I'm not sure that would play these days when we're turning to Big Pharma to save us from pestilences which are raging throughout the world. So Big Pharma we need. He certainly didn't like America, and it became a bit of a problem in the later books that usually America was the source of a lot of the evil in the books. Having said that, le Carré is a great writer. He's a great writer per se, not just a great writer of espionage, but a great novelist in the vein of predecessors such as Graham Greene. I then, in chapter 14, talk about domestic noir. That's a very popular genre at the moment and is kind of reigning. The problem this had, and I talked earlier about repetition, is the fact that they're usually about a marriage. And a lot of the novels early on were about women who were victimized by men. They were basically versions of, if you like, Rebecca or Jane Eyre. In that case, the men are redeemable, but they are nevertheless, they have committed crimes, but they're redeemable. A lot of domestic noir had really bad men and women who were suffering. I think fairly early on, female readers, as much as males, got rather bored with this trope. And so now when you read domestic noir, it isn't always quite so simple as being the man is the bad guy. And there are a lot of very good writers of domestic noir. The term was coined by the writer Julia Crouch. And there are very good writers such as Sarah Vaughan, not to be confused with the singer, with books such as Anatomy of a Scandal. I then, in the modern age, talked about cozy crime. We cannot ignore cozy crime. This is these novels in which there isn't much sex and violence. They are books that maybe you give to somebody who doesn't like to read about things which are unsettling, shall we say. Alexander McCall Smith, who with his Madame Ramotswe books, he said there will never be swearing or extreme violence in my books, and they're well written. They are not necessarily to everyone's taste, but they have a devoted following. You have some writers, such as Anglo-Asian writers, Wasim Khan, who writes what might be described as cozy crime, but with a particular edge. There's an edge in his books which takes him out of the cozy crime category. And while I'm on the subject of Anglo-Asian writers, there's another very good writer called Abir Mukherjee, and his books, which are set in the dying days of the Raj, with an English officer type and an Asian assistant. Wonderful. They are pretty well taking publishing by storm at the moment. There are a lot of very good Anglo-Asian writers. Imran Mahmood is another one who's written one terrific novel so forth, with another on the way. Blockbusters, and we're getting near the end now. Dan Brown, you love him or you hate him, but nobody can argue with the fact that however well written his books are, or however poorly written they are, he sells in the millions, and millions of people love his books. I just leave it out there for you to make your own mind up about Dan Brown. There are also books like I Am Pilgrim by Terry Hayes, which has that kind of blockbuster feel. But you can also have kind of literary blockbusters, which are extremely well written, such as Greg Iles' Mississippi Blood. There's comic crime, with writers such as Edmund Crispin, Janet Ivanovich, the English writer Christopher Fowler, who writes very good series with Bryant and May, American writers such as Carl Hiaasen and Elmore Leonard, I've already talked about. Historical crime, I'm speeding up now as we're getting near the end. We're lucky in Britain that we've got some very good women writers, like a cadre, very good women writers of historical crime fiction. We've got M.J. Carter, we've got Kate Griffin, Stephanie Paris, Antonia Hodgson. I've done panels with all of these women, and they are lively, they are inventive, they bring the eras that they choose to write about. Imogen Robertson's another one. They bring these eras to life with a vividness which you won't find in pretty well any other writer, and they're much shorter than Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. Philip Kerr was a very good writer of historical crime. He died recently, of course. Set in Berlin in the time of Hitler. Historical crime, we need to mention the king of British historical crime, Andrew Taylor, who's won and continues to win every award. C.J. Sampson, another very good writer. Foreign crime in translation, well, I've written about 4 books on the subject. Henning Mankell created, if you like, the first important detective after Sherwell and Varlow's series. So you've got Henning Mankell, you've got Sherwell and Varlow, you've got modern writers such as Yrsa Sigurðardóttir and Icelandic, Swedish, Nordic noir, maybe not quite as popular as it was. There was a time when the books were accompanied by television series such as The Killing and The Bridge, and without anything having quite that impact now. What is being published now in Nordic noir is just the really good stuff. There was a time when everything got translated and published over here. Now we're just getting the really good stuff, which is fine. Yrsa Sigurðardóttir is a good one to start with. Other writers in translation, well, I've not mentioned him yet. Georges Simenon. I went to a meal recently with his son, John, who's quite English in his manner. And he said to me, what do you think of my father's claim that he'd slept with thousands of women? And for some reason, the room fell silent. People wanted to see what I was going to say. And I said, well, I don't know. In Britain, we don't talk about the number of women we slept with. The British politician Nick Clegg did, and he got very bad time for it. And also, I don't believe that Georges Simenon slept with quite as many women as he did. He's an extremely prolific writer. How did he have time? And John Simenon said, my father knew the value of publicity. That line is quoted over the years and debated as we're debating it now, which we were. Simenon's books, the Maigret books, you can't just read one because you don't really get the feel of a Maigret book from any one book. It's not like, say, The Big Sleep, where you can say, this is the one Chandler's book to read. You need to read a whole cluster of them. And in this country, Penguin have translated them all newly. They've taken out, and I'm not sure I'm happy with this, certain controversial elements. There are slightly anti-Semitic elements in Simenon, and they've been slightly softened in the new translations, but that's only an element. But if you're going to take out unacceptable things in writers of the past, then you've got a problem with their ears, with the eternal pipe that he always smoked, along with his, along with Maigret. There's a lot of descriptions of Maigret filling his pipe in the novels. You realize how often that appears. But yeah, I was saying that you can't take out those elements which upset people. There's elements of anti-Semitism in such writers as Graham Greene, John Buchan, Shakespeare, of course. So I think you just have to, as long as readers know what they're reading, we don't have to be protected against the thinking of other eras. That's my own feeling. Boileau and Narcejac, I would mention, French writers who created the novels on which Hitchcock based Vertigo, and Henri-Georges Clouzot, Les Diaboliques. They are much imitated in the sense that they have a twist ending, and you know what those twists are, so I'm not going to rehearse them here. You've got Italian writers such as Andrea Camilleri with his Montalbanos, which are extremely well filmed. I asked to choose by the publisher, and we're getting very near the end. I'm on the last page now. 5 favorites, and I picked the following 5 books. So if you're going to read 5 novels of crime, these might be my 5. Purely arbitrary. The Mosque of Demetrios by Eric Ambler, still his best book. Graham Greene's The Ministry of Fear, which also presents a wonderful picture of Britain during wartime, during the Blitz. The Case Book of Sherlock Holmes, if you want to read just one Sherlock Holmes. Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep, and possibly Dennis Lehane's Mystic River. I suppose I could end by just saying that there are just too many modern writers for me to even begin to reference. I write about them in papers like the Financial Times and the Eye, and I can't see myself ever tiring of writing about the crime genre. And I hope in the last half hour or so, I've given you a brief picture of the entire crime genre. Thank you very much.
What a great review. Thank you, Mr. Forshaw. Thank you so much. I'm wondering, how did you start your career as a crime movies expert, a critic? Were you always interested in this genre?
I actually started when I've written for most British newspapers. So my first one was for a local newspaper. I'm from Liverpool, like the Beatles, was for a local paper. And then I wrote about all kinds of novels. And then in London, when I came to London, because you have to come to London. I mean, you know, you don't stay in the provinces. You have to go to London if you want to work in journalism. I would write about, for the Times, literature. And then one day I was asked to cover a crime novel, which I'd always loved. But slowly but surely, you find yourself typecast. And I realized that my days of reviewing literary novels were over. For the rest of my life, I would only write about crime fiction. That's fine with me.
I know that you wrote the biography of Stieg Larsson. What was it like, and how did you came to write that? I know you are also an expert on Nordic noir.
It's interesting for you that you should say that, because I didn't mention him in my roundup of Nordic noir, and yet, as you say, I wrote the first biography. I came about it because the Times said to me, "Who is this writer who he's died? He's been killed by the far right. There's a scandal over his estate. He completed 3 novels before he died. It all seems so unlikely, everything about it." I said, well, A, he wasn't killed by the far right. He was killed because he was a journalist and he liked to eat pizza and he smoked several packs of cigarettes a day. It would make a better story for him to be killed by the far right, but he wasn't. And his name's Stieg Larsson. So I was commissioned to write a piece about him, then a novel. And I went around the Scandinavian countries interviewing his translator, his editor, people who'd known him, at one point to his partner, his father, his brother. A fascinating figure. And to my knowledge, nobody else has completed a massive trilogy which became such a hit, and then they were dead. I think one has to say that the Stieg Larsson legend, a great big part of it is the fact that he is dead at the age of 50 and doesn't really live to see this phenomenal worldwide fame that he has posthumously.
Indeed. So, Mr. Forshaw, we love crime. We are fascinated with crime. It has always been like that, and I imagine it's gonna be like that. What do you think lies behind this instinct, behind our fascination with crime?
Fulya, in your life, I bet there have been people who've really annoyed you, who say somebody who got the job that you were the right woman for, somebody who did, a lover who left you, something. We all have reasons to be annoyed at our fellow human beings, but then we just have to bite it back, don't we? There's nothing we can do about it because we're not criminals, most of us. Criminals do read crime fictions, no question of that. I think it's the psychological working out of the things that maybe we would like to do in the crime novel. I think that's the appeal of his Highsmith's Ripley books. He does what we would like to do. He gets rid of people who are in his way. We'd never do it. So I think a big part of it is that psychological working out of things that, because we are civilized people who don't kill people. Having said that, there's a British writer, Martina Cole, who's very pleased with the fact that she's the most read crime writer in British prisons. Criminals love her books. So there are people who do act out their fantasies.
True. So, Mr. Forshaw, Barry, what would you say that crime fiction is today? I mean, 50 years later, 100 years later, when we look back to today, how would we categorize today's crime fiction, and where do you see this genre going in the future?
I think I mentioned in that talk I just gave, domestic noir is now possibly the biggest thing because crime has moved inwards. The problem with police procedurals and detective novels is that we've read so many. I bet you, Fulya, when you're reading crime novels, about half of them you can say halfway through, oh yeah, I know who did this. I know this. And it's a kind of game that the writer is playing with you. You were wrong. I'm going to say, you think it's this person, it's not that person. So you're playing a game with the reader. The trouble is we've read so many novels. We've read novels about alcoholic coppers who have a problem with authority, who have a problem with their children. This describes Ian Rankin's Rebus. It describes the novels of Cheval and Barlow. It describes Henning Mankell's novels. The middle-aged copper who is always being told by his boss, you don't go there, you leave that case alone. We've heard from the ministry that that person is to be left alone. And of course they disregard the rules. But the trouble is there are so many books like that. There had to be a reaction against them. And that at the moment is domestic noir, in which the family is the center of crime. But these things are all cyclical. They'll come around again. For instance, cozy crime, I mentioned earlier, is coming back. For many years, cozy crime just wasn't taken seriously. It was something elderly ladies read while they were knitting. But now a lot of people like cozy crime, and there's a kind of reaction against extreme violence in books, as I mentioned in Thomas Harris. So people will go back to things they wanted before. 100 years from now, we may well be reading about a great detective living in 221B Baker Street again. Well, look at the fact that, look how popular the Dominic Cumberbatch series was.
Yes.
That was a modern version of Sherlock Holmes, which took the ideas and the tropes that we all loved. And part of the pleasure of Sherlock was seeing, ah, yes, there's Lestrade. And at one point in one of them, there is a non-existent tube line called Sumatra Station. Those of us who read Sherlock Holmes will say, ah, yes, Giant Rat of Sumatra, the piece for which the world was not yet ready. So that was a program that worked really well because A, you didn't have to have read Sherlock Holmes to enjoy it. A lot of people have never read Conan Doyle and had never seen Jeremy Brett, never seen Basil Rathbone or Cushing. They still enjoyed the program. But those of us like you who did know that stuff, we enjoyed all those elements. So I think there'll always be a place for the super brilliant intellectual detective, which is Sherlock Holmes.
Indeed, of course. Thank you so much, Barry, for this great talk. I hope when all these quarantine time passes by and next year we will do this in person. Thank you so much.
That would be wonderful.
Talk, great review. Thank you.
Thank you, Polya. Bye.
Bye.